Why do we dream?
Dreaming is high-intensity training for creativity and imagination and emotion. There's mystery and magic to it, and it's a sacred space. If dreams are good for us, why do we have nightmares? We are inheriting our thinking and dream processes from our ancestors. When children dream of animals, they tend to dream of beasts, not puppies. Nightmares could be a warning sign for mental health issues. They're linked to depression, they're linked to suicide. We may have gotten it wrong thinking death is when the heart stops beating. Your brain dies a few minutes after your heart dies. Death is electrical silencing of brain activity. The heart is stopped, but for 3 minutes after, there's an explosion of brain activity. It doesn't go out in a whimper. The last thing that the brain does is just launch all the neurotransmitters, all the electricity. Some people who are resuscitated say, I saw my whole life story. It's consistent.
Or near-death experiences.
Those electrical patterns are like wild dreams. So maybe death is one last dream. There is one dream or dream pattern that predicts the future, and that's
Before we dive into today's episode, I'm going to ask you to do something very quick, very easy, but super helpful. I'm going to ask you to hit the subscribe button. You see it? Go get it. Hit the subscribe button. It just takes a second, but it means a lot to us. You have probably noticed from all of the comments that we get, many people find that listening to MBB regularly is helping them feel happier, healthier, more inspired. And you know what? That actually is why we are doing this. It makes my heart swell to hear that so many of you are feeling inspired. So subscribing to this show, whether you're listening on YouTube or whether you're listening to it through a podcast app, it's the easiest way to ensure that you will never miss an episode. So we don't want you to miss a single one, and you don't want to miss a single one. So you'll get notified as soon as a new episode drops. All you have to do is subscribe and share this episode with someone if you enjoy it. We're trying to spread the word. Help us do that. The best way to support our show is by subscribing. So do it now. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you. Let's get back to the good stuff. Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik.
I'm Jonathan Cohen.
Welcome to our breakdown.
Jumped on my line there. We're so excited.
We're very excited because we're going to find out what the heck is happening when our eyes close and it's night time.
It turns out a lot more than we expected.
We used to think we understood what was going on in sleep and in dreams, but the science has changed so much and so rapidly. We're going to be talking to Rahul Jandial. He's an MD, PhD. He's a neurosurgeon and a neuroscientist. And he wrote This Is Why You Dream. And it's all about the fascinating science behind what we're dreaming, the cultural similarities of people's dreams, people's nightmares. What's the function of a nightmare? What's up with erotic dreams? Everybody wants to know. And what are the things that we can do to help us harness the power of lucid dreaming? And how can it impact our waking life?
We're going to talk about the imagination network and the executive functioning network and how those interplay between our waking life and our sleep life.
Dr. Jandial has fascinating perspective as someone who literally operates on brains, holds people's lives in his hand, and is going to describe for us how he can literally create a memory of a nightmare during open brain surgery.
I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. We also get a little esoteric. We bring him into the MBB spiritual world. We talk about what the brain does right before it dies. And I was just like, my jaw was on the floor for that. You may have seen him other places before, but you've actually never seen him like you're about to.
Dr. Jandial oversees the Jandial Lab at City of Hope Cancer Center in Los Angeles. He also has an unbelievable nonprofit, the International Neurosurgical Children's Association, where he performs and teaches brain surgery in underserved hospitals in Central and South America, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe. He's the author of several books, including Life Lessons from a Brain Surgeon and Life on a Knife's Edge. But today we're going to be talking about This Is Why You Dream. Let's welcome to the breakdown, Rahul Jandial.
Break it down.
We talk a lot about dreams. It's something we talk a ton about, and This Is Why You Dream was very helpful. And we wanted you to sort of give us the primer, first of all. Why do we dream?
Massive question, right? I mean, who should be given the opportunity to even answer that question? But my hypothesis, my understanding is based on neuroscience that's only been available for the last 20, 30 years. So, of course, you've trained in it. I'm 52. That was my training. And so the prior like theories were just shots in the dark, like, oh, it's threat training. Oh, it's nocturnal therapist. But what I found is that um, modern neuroscience shows that in a 24-hour cycle, our brain is never off. So when we sleep, you're not resting. Your brain is not resting. It's not like a computer screen that turns off, you click the keyboard and it pops back on. So what's happening in that 24-hour cycle is you have like the waking brain and the sleep dreaming brain. And the metabolic activity, the glucose being used, the electricity that's being churned out by those neurons is burning hot when you sleep and dream. And so that speaks to something important must be happening. Like you're not going to hold on to that capacity through evolution if it's not important. So then the idea comes, well, how is that dreaming brain different than the waking brain? And what you find in the waking brain is the executive networks tend to reign and dominate things. Fancy words, but dorsolateral prefrontal cortex controls the executive networks, and it keeps us, able to drive on traffic, get on the subway, and that's important. That area is dampened. Nothing's ever off in the dreaming brain. And other areas like the imagination network or the limbic system are liberated. So if the dreaming brain is a hypervisual, hyper-imaginative state, my idea is the brain needs to let that loose to maintain that capacity. So use it or lose it. So the brain is saying, we need a safe space to let this imagination, to let this, desire, to let this visual sort of adventures and awkward social situations happen in a safe space. Otherwise, we'll lose that complexity. So my idea is, to put it briefly, is dreaming is high intensity training for creativity and imagination and emotion, based on the way the brain is different in those two states.
Why are there nightmares? Meaning, if that's the place for me to play and have imagination and creativity, why are so many people plagued by a high level of negative intensity with dreams?
Come on, if dreams are good for us, why do we have nightmares? And that's a straight up question. I think it's an important one. The way I made that chapter too because I wanted to get in front of it. What we find with nightmares. So now you can go back like 50 years or 100 years, and now some of the stories start even with like Aristotle writing about lucid dreaming. So those are surveys, questionnaires. People are logging things for centuries. And then there are measurements. When I talked about the dreaming brain, and that was more of things we can measure, and I try to link the ideas. Nightmares arrive for children no matter how healthy the upbringing. These are called longitudinal studies. Like they had families say, here's our 4-year-old, and ask them about dreaming until they're like 24 years old. And so you get an idea of how dream patterns arrive at which age. And every kid has a nightmare, and they tend to arrive at age 4, 5, 6, 7, something like that. So as far as pediatric nightmares, they arrive, and almost overwhelmingly they go away. Kids don't really have nightmare disorders. So the best way I've come to understand nightmares is to break them into two categories: pediatric nightmares that arrive for healthy kids, and then late in life nightmares that sometimes pop up once in a while, or more concerningly, like after trauma or PTSD, they become recurrent. And those are some of those nightmares I think have to be understood to be a little bit different.
This guy.
She's
I
pointing
mean,
to you.
how many fingers are pointing back?
Yeah, it's funny. But those are two separate themes for nightmares. And in adults, I think nightmares could be a warning sign if you look at the pattern of nightmares, not the occasional nightmare, but what we call progressive. Like a headache, not a big deal. A headache the next day, worse, stronger. Progressive nightmares could be a warning sign for mental health issues. They're linked to, that doesn't mean they're causing suicide, but they're linked to depression. They're linked to suicide. So I see them as adults, maybe a vital sign rather than blood pressure and pain and temperature. And then I see them in children. And children, it's all hypothetical, but they happen to come at the same time as the cultivation of theory of mind. So just like we learn to walk and talk, we also are the mind is being cultivated, right? It starts to get a sense of self versus other, and then it becomes, then it develops sexual features, and then there's adolescence. The flesh looks the same, but the mind is going through a lot of changes. There has to be something, a universal cognitive feature like nightmares arriving at age 4, 5, 6 in every kid. It's got to be cultivating or fine tuning the mind aspect more so than the brain. So that's the sort of the two ways I think about it.
Have there been links between children who are under some sort of increased stress with frequency of nightmare?
I don't have a specific answer for that, and so the surveys on children are limited. But I think that's a question that I asked originally. Like, there was this terrible thing, like I don't know if it's Belarus, where the kids weren't picked up in orphanages, and then they scanned their brains, and it was like they were smoother. There was a lack of those folds that allow surface area to develop. The same way, I was like, well, kids who've had a harder life maybe they have more nightmares, and I didn't find that as an obvious link.
But you talk about trauma and the
Mhm.
connection between trauma and sleep, which I thought was really interesting.
Mhm.
Because to me, it's a little bit of an opening. You talk so much about how what happens at night is in many cases a reflection of also what your brain is working on in the day. So if you're working on a lot of trauma, or you're talking about neglect, right? Like constitutional neglect, it wouldn't surprise me that that sort of makes its way into the nightmare world as well, or the sleep world.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just to reverse, like you can't the waking mind experiences and memory are of course feeding the dreaming mind. That goes way to the concept of like, can you interpret dreams as like, does a basket mean the same thing for all of us? It's hard given that we're always adding our own imagination, our own memory into it. But yes, it seems reasonable that people who are struggling, that would be reflected in some way in their dreams. I just didn't find a lot of, you can't actually search like some of these things. It's all like tangential, like imagination and trauma on kids. And so it was
Right.
really like hunting for links, because there is no, I don't think so, but there isn't like a professor of dream science. It's not really a science. It had to pull from trauma, imagination, perception. But your point is well taken.
I was just thinking, like, I've been to a lot of doctors, I've been to a lot of therapists, right? No one ever says, how are you, like, what are you dreaming about? Or what is your dream life like? Like, they'll be like, how many hours are you sleeping a night, right? The psychiatrists love to ask that. And I'm like, well, what kind of 5 hours do you want me to describe to you, you know?
Exactly.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Quince.
As the temps start rising, I feel that familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I'm not wasting money on pieces that I'll only wear once or just for one season. Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. Quince has 100% European linen shorts and dresses from $30, luxe swimwear, Italian leather, platform sandals, and so much more. The best part, everything with Quince is half the cost of similar brands. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middle people, Quince gives you luxury without the markup. Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. I've got my eye on a few of their linen jumpsuits and polarized sunglasses to help me get ready for some summer fun. All pieces that we think would make incredible additions to anyone's summer style. I recommend checking out their summer lookbook for some inspo. Other similar luxury gift shops just don't compare to Quince's style, quality, and price.
Give your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/breakdown for free shipping on your orders and 365-day returns. That's
QUINCE.com/breakdown to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/breakdown.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Ritual.
It is so important to know that your best interests are represented during your pregnancy, but unfortunately, when it comes to clinical studies in healthcare, women are often treated like an afterthought. Pregnant women, particularly those from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds, are routinely excluded from clinical studies. And many prenatal multivitamins aren't even clinically tested, yet they're intended to support one of the most critical phases of human development. Ritual is closing the gap and aiming to set a new standard in the supplement industry with a groundbreaking 24-week clinical trial for their essential prenatal multivitamin. They're also pushing for more inclusive and comprehensive studies that prioritize women, especially during pregnancy. It is such a relief to know that Ritual exists. They are mom-founded, third-party tested for heavy metals and microbes, and they share the sources and suppliers behind their key ingredients. Ritual is the #1 best-selling prenatal and the only leading prenatal backed by its own human clinical trial. Essential Prenatal was shown to help deliver key nutrients, including folate, biotin, and vitamin D. Moms taking Ritual had a lower overall cortisol level during pregnancy than those taking a leading prenatal. Ritual selects bioavailable key nutrients designed for optimal absorption. Methylated folate in Essential Prenatal was clinically proven to be well absorbed and demonstrated a more efficient utilization of folate versus a leading prenatal with folic acid. Designed with morning sickness in mind, moms taking Ritual reported their prenatal to be easier to swallow, gentler on the stomach, and a better overall positive experience than those taking a leading prenatal. Don't settle for less than evidence-based support. Get 25% off your first month at ritual.com/breakdown. Start Ritual or add Essential Prenatal to your subscription today.
That's ritual.com/breakdown for 25% off. We're going to get into dream interpretation later because I think there's a fascinating exploration about how we assign personal meaning that you explain. But let's step back a little bit and get some of the overview in terms of, can you talk a little bit about this idea of smoothness that you just mentioned in brain structure? Because I think a lot of people don't quite understand that, myself included. And then talk about, the evidence that you saw of dreams being in the brain through awake surgeries.
Ooh, okay. So first of all, thank you. I try to be clear about measurements, surveys. I'm not disparaging anybody or any approach, but sometimes it's too easy to say the brain does this or this is good for your brain. It may be true. I just need that one step further explanation. Where at what scale? Is it at the flesh? Is it at the electrochemistry, like where we might take antidepressant? Just one step deeper gives me a sense that it's been explored a little bit. So that said, when you look at the brain, much like in the Grand Canyon, you can see the different types of dinosaurs, like their sedimentary layers. You can date how old the neurons are based on evolution. And so what happened most recently was it's not really modular but it's connected, the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain with emotions, instinct, which is its own kind of genius. And then the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that over time pushed our foreheads forward. The frontal bossing we have is from that growth. And so to accommodate that growth, the forehead was pushed forward. But also, like a pizza, it had to be smushed together like an accordion to fit inside the skull. So those ridges are a way to have a greater surface area of what they call the cortical canopy, and the neurons are all on top. So when you see the brain, the other thing, the brain's not a homogeneous structure. You know that. When you look at the side, there's different anatomical regions, there's different fibers. Under a microscope, there are different cell types. It's not like the liver where you cut it, wherever you cut it, it just looks like tiles. And so what happens is the neurons, if you think of them as molecular jellyfish, the bodies are all on the surface. And then the tentacles are coming down, sort of like a mushroom to the brainstem that controls your body. So to fit in all of those neurons on the cortical canopy, and there's a lot of sort of ecology terms that I love. To understand the brain, you kind of have to think of it as an ecosystem and as a garden. And cortex means bark, it's the top, centimeter. That's where the neurons are situated. So once in a while, when there's a deep-seated tumor, we have to get to a deeper brain structure. That means you're going to have to go through the cortical canopy. And to do that safely, patients choose, particularly with language, something called awake brain surgery. I know it's for 60, 70 years. It's what's done at all the elite centers. It's possible because the brain doesn't feel touched directly. In the exposed brain, with the person awake, if you touch just gently the surface of the brain, there's no feeling that somebody touched me. The perception is all through the nerves that come out of our skull and our body. So whereas movement, like a Lombard Street right here, we know this is motor, does hand, this is motor, this does hand. But language is usually left temporal lobe, and it's a neighborhood, but it's not a specific address. That address has to be determined in each person when they're awake. So the scalp is numb, they're under anesthesia.
How big a hole are we talking about?
About a cookie size.
He likes big cookies.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mrs. Fields nibblers, yeah. 12 for it's an interesting question. You know, in the past,
Like it could be an Oreo size.
not for this. It depends.
Right.
It depends on. We try to do the smallest hole possible, but it has to provide sufficient exposure. So the incision is in the sideburn, and it's a medium cookie size hole in the skull. It's done behind the hairline with an absorbable stitch. You don't see the scar.
because you're taking a flap out of the skull in order to access.
Like ice fishing. But,
Yeah.
you make one hole, and you lift that piece of skull out,
Yeah.
and you put it on the back table, look like a cookie. And then the brain isn't just there. It's covered with a sheath, a little bit like a nylon parachute called a dura mater. And then you lift that up and you incise that, and then it's something beautiful. I mean, it's opalescent. It's not gray. It's shimmering. I mean,
Wow.
it's not. The whole thing about the brain is like nothing you've seen before. And the fact that it's that way when it's getting so much blood flow, like, shouldn't it be red? But so there's mystery and magic to it immediately when you look at it, and it's a sacred space. So now, with like a faint pen, it looks like a fountain pen, the tiniest bit of electricity, you're looking for disruption of function. So that means the patient has got a drape, and somebody's sitting there talking to them. They've been, they've woken up. They're still a little groggy, but the scalp is numb, so they're not in pain. And you march, you tickle a little spot, and you see if it disrupts their speech. So they're asked to count or sing or speak in different languages.
A language that they know, obviously.
Yeah,
You can't be like, you speak Mandarin now.
Just
you
by
tap
touching
now.
that.
Yeah, the reason is that if you injure their primary tongue, they lose all languages that they
Wow.
may have learned. But if you grew up with English and you learned Spanish, like I did, if you injure Spanish, I'll still be able to have English. So there's
Wait a second.
there's some
English and
nuance there.
Spanish, the
Primary
primary tongue and secondary languages are stored in slightly different areas.
Storage may not be the right
Yeah,
word,
sounds
but if you injure the primary tongue, you lose all languages subsequently learned.
So basically, the structure for language is established in whatever your primary tongue is. God doesn't know what people are going to be and where they're going to grow up. So you have a template in your brain. I mean, depending on how Chomskyan you want to be, like there is language that is built. Upon that language, you build other languages.
Which is
He loves this.
no, I understand that, but to think that as you're poking around, it could be the difference between how like
Confetti-sized pieces.
confetti-sized parts of the brain that would cause someone to lose one versus the other is amazing.
And the way to think of that is it's not necessarily that little piece, but that piece could be the hub of something
The hub,
bigger, right?
yeah.
Like Heathrow or LAX, you disrupt that,
Right.
you're changing the world.
Yeah.
That's an excellent question. The language thing, and so the natural questions are like, well, what if you learn both, or what if
Yeah.
Braille, sign language? So there's a lot of interesting questions that others, when they do these operations, will bring to you, and so it's a field that's always interesting to read. But back to it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you tickle, and they say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they don't pause. What you're looking for is something called speech arrest. And if you hit the next confetti piece that you're mapping out, they'll go 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3,
Oh.
3,
The
And it
record
sounds-
skip.
and then you put a red piece of confetti. So that means to get to the deeper part of the brain, you cannot
Go through there.
dissect through that little piece. So in the end, it looks like Swiss cheese that you've made little portals in to get to the deeper brain to dissect out.
And
the
you're
tumor.
finding the least destructive pathway to get deeper.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. That you don't want to lose any part of your brain, but you're going through areas that don't have functional significance for language and communication. When that happens, back to dreams, and it's been reported from the Montreal experience for a while, and it's not some sort of like magical recent thing. It's just that people are in my field, they don't take these things and think about how that could be broadly relevant. But sometimes when you tickle, you can activate people's nightmares, recurrent nightmares they've had since they were a kid.
What
And
does
they
that
will
look?
say-
What does that look like when you're?
They're freaked out. That's a nightmare I had when I was young.
Oh,
And
They're re-experiencing in that moment.
they're not falling asleep.
So it's the only thing it's the only thing I can say about dreams is that they come from the brain because I've activated one. Everything else is a conversation.
Wow.
That's how I opened the book.
So when you think about in terms of how information is coded in the brain, like this is intricate and fascinating because we're talking about a localization, right? That is producing an experience.
Because the electricity is reverberating like aurora borealis all across the brain, it's not like that spot does that only and the next spot does creativity.
Totally.
It's just that spot is in a certain hub that if you trip it up, it throws off all kinds of synchrony throughout the brain, rather than like this does this, and this is where creativity lives, and this is where love lives. It's just really not like that. And the best example I can come up with is the way like financial markets work or airports work through hubs and flights and different things. You could, technically Heathrow's a very small place on the planet, but you're going to have larger scale disruptions with it. I think that's how you think about spots in the brain. Not that that spot does that and then the next spot does the next thing.
I'm going to ask something that might make you uncomfortable
Sure.
because I greatly appreciate your desire and need for clarity and evidence. So this is a little bit more metaphysical.
Sure.
The idea that the nightmare is in the brain, if we think about, we talk a lot to physicists and think about the hard problem of consciousness, it could also be that they're wired in the brain because you've had the experience, so they're recreated by those mechanisms, but they didn't necessarily start initially in the brain. Do you know what I mean? Like where they were experienced first, it could be that you've had those repeated grooves and therefore now it's mapped. In the
That
brain.
doesn't make me uncomfortable at all. I think that's fascinating. I don't know if some energy is crossing the skull to initiate or seed cognitive experiences. I haven't seen that. I'm not opposed to that. I'm open to that. What I would add is, of the dreams, the nightmares as a species of dreams, it's the only dream that follows sort of a hereditary pattern. So adding to that, what I would say is we are inheriting our thinking and dream processes from our ancestors. And so that might sound woo-woo to some, but I want to provide the evidence for that is that when children dream of animals, it's not puppies. It's not Fido. They tend to dream of beasts.
Yeah.
And so you see certain patterns of thought. And you say, well, of course that makes sense because you can get depression from family. You get bipolar, you get schizophrenia. And nightmare disorder clusters in family. But teeth falling out doesn't cluster in family. Flying doesn't cluster in families. And then nightmares and erotic dreams are almost universal. They always arrive at approximately the same time, no matter the country and no matter the era. And so you start to see that, much like in my opinion, much like, when you're born, you're not walking and talking, it's cultivated in you. And if you don't encourage that person to walk and talk, or if we cover an eye for medical purposes where those neurons would receive that signal, they wither. I think same thing with the cultivation of the mind. It's what we engage with children, but also there are some patterns of 5 or 6. They all get nightmares because I'm a pediatric neurosurgeon by passion, also in other countries, and you see 5 or 6, they all have nightmares. I've had 3 sons. I've had to tell them it's only a nightmare, and then it makes you think can they not discern dream thoughts from day thoughts until nightmares? So I can never prove that, but those are the metaphysical adjacent questions that I also like to ask. And then, they get erotic dreams, but they've never seen or had the erotic act. It arrives before, almost like a guidebook. And then they go through adolescence, not perfectly, and a lot of mental health issues happen there. But those 3 things, nightmares, erotic dreams, and adolescence, are mental changes, mind changes that happen. I feel like that's built in. That's built in from the neurons and unlikely to, not impossible, but unlikely to come from outside the skull.
There's a few things you touch on here. One of them is the universality of symbols in the dream. And I never considered that. I, for example, have dreamt a lot about tigers or lions chasing me. I've never had an experience with a tiger or lion. I wonder if that is inherited through ancestral connection. And I also wonder, are there universal animals that are dreamt across cultures more commonly than others?
So I was really looking for that. And I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of things. And there were some mentions of like pterodactyls. I was like, come on, this is just, but that's just a mention. I can't, we need more.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, imagine if the next 30 years, if we took away all the judgment and made it anonymous and let everybody sort of log their dream thoughts, patterns, content, somebody other than me 20, 30 years from now will have more brain surface recordings, plus more of that like granularity of surveys and all the things they can connect.
Yeah.
And so, yes, the beasts more than pets was something I noticed in a paper or two. It was just surveys. I thought that stuck out to me. Nightmares being inherited. I said maybe that that's linked. But yeah, dreams in children are interesting because you have to rely on their communication. So they have to develop it first. And one interesting pattern that I found was their complexity of their dreams was linked more to the complexity of their visual motor maturation than it was like math and memory. I was like, that's interesting. Which one's feeding which? Is it because you're getting good at your physical environment and then your dreams are that way? Or is the dream becoming colorful and then you can navigate your physical environment better? I'm not sure, but I like those kind of questions.
There's an example in the book where you talk about attempts to predict personalities based on reports of dreams. And there was this one study you talked about where the dreams were almost the opposite of the personality predictors, meaning the question was, can we decide who is the most mature, who's the most sophisticated, who's the most, analytical of a thinker based on their dreams? And it turned out that people with like the craziest, most like creative dreams were actually the people who were not necessarily the most creative or imaginative people in their day life. Can you talk a little bit about some of those discrepancies?
Yeah, so I was fascinated with that. In Parkinson's and other things, there are these thoughts. So this is going to take a little bit, but it's a very beautiful concept here. So now this is measurements. Like it's going to feel wild, but there is one dream or dream pattern that predicts the future, and that's in Parkinson's patients. When they get something called REM behavior disorder, people can look it up. It's almost invariably men in their 50s. They start having what I like to call it dream enactment behavior, because REM behavior disorder, who's going to get that? But they end up acting out their dreams. Their temporary paralysis of dream life is not there, and they attack their bed partners. And so those people that have that, 94 to 96% in the future, 13, 14, 15 years later, will develop Parkinson's. So a change in your dream pattern, and this, like, you could look this up on Scientific American, like this is not it's things we know, but I tried to really connect it all. But a change in dream pattern can predict the actual degeneration of the brain with Parkinson's 14 years in advance, REM behavior disorder. Those people, the first question they asked were, are they just wilding out at night because they're just raging hard during the day? And it was like, no, they were in general, as a survey, they were sort of mellow, docile people, and then they were just raging out through their dream changes. So it's not clear, like, a wild waking life equals a wild dream life. And what I like about that is we wouldn't expect the waking life to be, look, there are a lot of thoughts I have that I don't want. There are a lot of thoughts that I have that aren't interesting. There are, let's leave dream cognition, dream experiences, because those neurons are going. Even if your neurons are going on fire when you're running, being chased by a tiger, it's just that your leg muscles aren't going. But the neurons in the motor strip are recording activity, right? So it's happening at the brain. It's just not resonating through the body.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Calm.
There's so much happening these days. It can feel especially stressful or maybe hopeless when things are outside of your control. Calm can help you restore your sense of balance amidst outside chaos. Calm helps with the big three: anxiety, stress, and sleep problems. Their meditations help me untangle the day's chaos in my brain, and breath has a direct link to anxiety. I feel more at ease and in my body after easy and helpful breathing exercises. Calm is the #1 app for sleep and meditation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. Everyone faces unique challenges in their daily lives, and mental health is not about a cookie-cutter approach. That's why Calm offers a wide range of content and programs to help you navigate life's ups and downs, like meditations to help you work through your anxiety and stress, boost focus, build healthier habits, and take better care of your physical well-being. Sleep stories, sleep meditations, calming music help you drift off to restful sleep quickly and naturally. And grounding exercises if you're feeling overwhelmed. They use sensation, movement, and breath to help you relax and reset. There's also expert-led talks to help you handle grief, improve self-esteem, care for relationships, and so much more. Calm puts the tools you need right in your pocket and can help you dedicate just a few minutes each day to live a happier, healthier life. Stress less, sleep more, and live better with Calm.
For listeners of our show, Calm is offering an exclusive 40% off their Calm premium subscription at calm.com/break. Go to
calm.com/break for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/break.
Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Olipop.
If you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time, you know health is very important to me and Jonathan, especially gut health. And I gave up traditional soda years ago, but that doesn't mean that I haven't missed awesome flavors and crisp, refreshing bubbles. That's why we are huge fans of Olipop, a new kind of soda that combines the classic soda taste with the benefits of a functional ingredient blend to support digestive health. Olipop is reimagining soda with high fiber and only 2 to 5 grams of sugar per can. You can find Olipop sold online, and they're available in almost 50,000 retailers nationwide. 2 out of 3 Americans say that they suffer from digestive issues. 95% of Americans don't get the daily recommended amount of fiber. Olipop is tackling both of these issues with a drink that just tastes like soda. Research has linked some of these issues to poor gut health, so take care of your microbiome. That could be one solution to your digestive problems. Prebiotic fiber is the food source for the beneficial probiotic bacteria in your gut. Olipop's got 9 grams of prebiotic fiber in every can that helps support your digestive health. Olipop conducted a study that showed that their OliSmart formulation boosts beneficial gut bacteria and generates metabolites supporting digestive and overall health. They've got nostalgic, delicious flavors like vintage cola, classic root beer, orange squeeze, classic grape, strawberry vanilla, cream soda, and cherry cola. They also have a Dr. Pepper dupe called Dr. Goodwin. I need to get more of those because I cannot keep those on the shelf in my fridge. And a brand new Sprite dupe, lemon lime flavor. Right now you can get a free can of Olipop. Buy any 2 cans of Olipop in store and they'll pay you back for 1.
This offer works on any flavor at any retailer. Go to drinkolipop.com/break. That's
drinkolipop.com/break. Olipop is also sold online on their site and on Amazon, and they're available in almost 50,000 retailers nationwide, including Costco, Walmart, Target, Publix, Whole Foods, Kroger, and H-E-B.
It's fascinating. I'd like to touch back on what you were talking about in children, the idea of understanding the waking life through nightmare, meaning the differentiation between those two worlds. Can you talk a little bit more about how the evolutionary process almost of...
It's a conversation, right? So, but I'm just saying there's some really interesting things here that, well, first of all, when people say that, oh, I don't dream, well, so I've never met somebody who doesn't know what a nightmare is. It's a universal dream. I mean, I guess somebody could say I've never had one, but you know what I mean? It's a species of dream we've all had and we all know what it is. And part of a nightmare, which is very different in other dreams, is by definition, it's got to wake you up and it's got to sear your memory.
Not just a bad dream. You make a distinction between people have shitty dreams all the time. Yeah. Nightmare's a different class.
It's like almost you don't want to go back to sleep. It's like it's that intense.
And we know what nightmares are because they freak you out. You wake up and the memory is wildly active and it's seared, imprinted. Whereas bad dream is you wake up and there's a residue and what happened? Oh, I don't want to feel that way anymore. Most dreams are looked at in the rear view. The nightmare is the only dream that wakes you up, slaps you around and says, you're going to remember this. So that's interesting in its own way. And then when you think about in children, I have 3 grown sons, all of them, and I've taken care of a lot of patients, thousands. All of them, at some point, I had to tell them, it was only a nightmare. Which when I started putting this book together, I was like, does that mean they didn't know until then? Is the nightmare serving that purpose? I don't have those answers, but it is a very interesting thing that they have to be taught. This thing you just went through in bed, it didn't really happen. It's in your head. And that's a whole different lifestyle and life and adventures you have. And that's a very interesting training ground for the mind.
So there are children who, I mean, we just had Jim Tucker on, a psychiatrist who studies children who claim to have lived other lives. He studied about 2,000 cases at UVA, and he was at the UVA Division of Perceptual Studies. And, you know, in many cases, these kids are explaining an experience that is more real than a dream, more real than even a memory. It's like a lived experience. What about people who have dreams that they say and report feel more real than a dream? Is that a thing? Because this universe over here might be like, it's an experience. They're channeling it from another consciousness. Like, what is there a categorical difference?
I think it's fascinating as a training ground because physiologically, we experience that fatigue sometimes after a crazy nightmare, or when we go through something. If it's an erotic dream, we feel aroused, or if it's terror,
blood pressure is through the roof. Yeah, I hear you.
So it's interesting to think about those things as a training ground and how we differentiate what's real. It could be, if we're thinking about the evolutionary benefit, some of our awake mental daydreams or mental ruminations can also have that same experience, right? They can cause physiological change. And if we say, wait a second, that's not real either, are we having them as children? Again, this is just a hypothesis. Are we having them as children so that we can also say in our waking mind, wait a second, I can control some of where my mind goes and I don't have to follow it?
That's an interesting concept. I'm just trying to draw the line between it's your imagination network. Okay, so I'm just going to back up a little bit. I can't say yes or no to, is it I'm alive and there's an energy entering me from outside my skull as an adult. I don't know. I don't have any evidence for that. I'm not saying other people aren't. If they're feeling it, they're feeling it. You know, they're not hurting anybody. I'm not against it. But I can't tell you that we're inheriting cognitive features from our ancestors. That shouldn't be a surprise. I can't tell you that your dream patterns fit that. I can tell you that Aristotle was talking about lucid dreams, and there's hardcore evidence now that proves it. So that there are thousands of years of dream reports that fit some patterns, that this is not accidental, that there's a dreaming process that's running. Universal dreams, common dreams, very infrequent dreams, math, calculation. Now, somebody might have it, but in general, because
I speak not my native tongue in my dreams.
Yeah, and
it's not normal.
And so your dream is infinitely wild. Yours is infinitely wild. But when you start looking at thousands of dreams, math is very rarely reported. And then going back to our original conversation, that dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is dampened, which is what does calculation. Because we know when people get injured there, they get acalculia, which they can't do math. So I'm just putting a few of those patterns together. And then as far as imagination, so that's really fascinating, because I think that's what makes us, I don't know, that's the thing that that's the genius I love the most. So a couple of things about that. The newest neurons that are being formed in the MPFC, the medial prefrontal cortex, they're all related to like social cognition. Like if you have injury there, they can't change their political views, or they don't get social faux pas. So I think it's really exciting. It's not like we're getting stronger at like memorizing numbers to advance with each other and life, but it's a social interaction that happens. That said, I think dreaming cultivates that. Lets us try out things in that area. And so what happens in the dreaming brain is the imagination network, default mode, they have different names for it. I like to call it the imagination network. It's the thing that when we daydream is our mental workspace. So there are, if you think of structurally as the brain as like continents, they take turns being dominant and not dominant, never off, because that's a stroke. It's never, nothing's ever off. It's just the modulation. You wake up and you focus on getting something done. Your mental workspace, your imagination network is dampened, because that right now you actually have to get some executive things done. Things are under control. You don't have to search for food. you're able to now drift back into your own thoughts and have imagination. And to your point, imagination while we're awake, or wild imagination in our dream life, I think is crucially important to pushing the complexity of our thoughts forward. Because that's where we're running the ideas, the counterfactual thinking. If I go here, this happens. If I go here, this doesn't happen. Like it's choices that have made us who we are, right? We're not just reflexive. Going back to children, I think nightmares, that when you have to tell a child that it was only a dream, maybe that liberates imagination during the day. Like you can let some things run wild. It's just my idea. But back to you, like you can let some things run wild, but you don't have to actually carry out the act. You can imagine, wait, my uncle is smiling at me, but do they really wish me well? That's called theory of mind, being able to put yourself in other people's shoes. So whether daytime imagination feeds nighttime, or whether, I don't think it can be separated, but that's because the brain for 24 hours is on. It's just on in different ways.
So in terms of, I want to get a little bit into lucid dreams, because lucid dreaming is a state where the body in theory is asleep, but the mind is able to maintain access to this kind of imagination network, right? Explain for people who don't know, and I have such a funny lucid dreaming story. My kids were homeschooled until high school, and there's a lot of cool and quirky kids in the homeschool community. And there's this one kid, I won't name him, but if he's listening to this, hello. And he was really into lucid dreams. And I remember thinking, like, what an unusual thing for like a 12-year-old kid to be like talking to all the other kids about. And I used to kind of like tease my kids about it, like, oh, your friend and his lucid dreams. This is a thing. It's a thing.
Yeah.
Explain what lucid dreaming is and why people are interested in accessing it.
So this is massive. When I was asked by my publisher, this was in London, that they always wanted a book that was going to be bring in neuroscience, but don't smash people's dreams and magic, right? Just crush it, just actually ignite it, because some things can be understood. And I thought, and then, there's going to be a chapter on lucid dreams. I was like, oh, lucid dreams. I ended up putting in 2 chapters in the book.
Did you know about it ahead of time?
I knew about it a little bit, but it was the thing I wanted to avoid.
Yeah, it was out there.
It was out there. It was the most woo-woo.
You go deep.
I gave it 2 chapters. Nothing else got 2 chapters, because that was refreshing for me too. So this is a little bit of a long wind-up on this, but I think people should know. For me, lucid dreaming, the first thing I was like, they're just faking it. I'm asleep, but we have a way, so just like you put the 3 electrodes on the surface of the heart and you get a little electrical squiggle for an EKG, and all those television shows. Well, that's really the 3 nerves that are on the surface of the heart. So they're generating a little bit of electricity. You put 96 scalp electrodes and you record that, you get all these waveforms and beautiful patterns, almost look like earthquakes. Well, there's something called a sleep spindle. You can't fake being asleep on that. So that was the first thing I was like, all right, prove to me they had sleep spindles. Because in the epilepsy world, when they've fallen asleep, because there's a sleep spindle, right? So it's not just going to be somebody like, I'm lucid dreaming, I'm in heaven, I'm flying over the moon. You might be. But I gotta see that you're truly asleep when you're... So
you're looking, just to clarify, you're looking for physiological evidence, electrophysiological evidence that this person, by all of our diagnostic criteria for sleep, is asleep. But what is going on when they're lucid dreaming?
So that's the basis, because I don't want to get duped, like that's not, because then there's not, it's not rigorous. Outside of that, the way I think about it is like, when we talked about, I don't think we're ever fully awake or fully asleep, and you find these what I call liminal states. Going from the waking brain to the sleep dreaming brain, there's like a sleep entry period where the electricity overlaps, that it's 2 different states, and then when you wake up, sleep exit, there's a sort of an overlap period. And I think that makes sense. Like, it's not going to be a millisecond that you change, frames of mind. It doesn't happen in nature. It doesn't happen in estuaries as rivers meet oceans, But lucid dreaming is in the middle. It's not in falling asleep. It's not waking up. You're in the middle of sleep, couple hours in, and you have a return of awareness that you are actually in a dream. Usually it's in the rear view, like, oh, I had a dream. Oh, I had a bad dream. But this is, oh, I'm dreaming while asleep.
But
And-
how can you be asleep if you're thinking I'm
Well,
dreaming?
that's so.
Is it a thing?
It's a thing. So I'm gonna set this up for you. So, the person is there in a sleep lab. They've got the electrodes. Behind a glass is a sleep researcher. The electrodes are showing they're asleep. Part of the paralysis that happens in our body when we sleep temporarily, the parts that are spared are breathing and eye movement. So what they do is they'll communicate and set up codes that, hey, 1 + 1 is 2, true or false, and they'll make eye movements as a way to communicate, like Morse code.
Wait a second. The person sleeping
So
is
they do-
communicating
so they do-
with a sleep
so
researcher?
the way
They're
you-
With the sleep spindle, so they are asleep.
So the way you test it is you say to the patient, there are certain ways that you're going to indicate to me when you're lucid dreaming because they're conscious. So they come up with little like ways so that when they're sleeping,
3
they
eyeball
will know.
movements to the left
Okay.
is
Exactly.
yes.
That's crazy to me because I just assumed that they were aware
No.
enough to be aware of
No.
their dream, but
We
they're
gotta prove
still in
it.
the dream zone.
Okay, that's an interesting point.
Right,
Yeah,
like,
but
I'm-
and also meaning they can hear from somebody outside of their dream.
No, they are able to communicate
Communicate
to
with
the
researchers,
researcher. I'm in it. We're in it.
'Cause
Let's
that's-
lock in.
That's
Yeah.
wild to me. I always assumed that it's like, oh, I now am in the Matrix and I know I'm in the Matrix versus not knowing,
No.
but they're actually standing at the bridge of both of those
Yeah,
worlds.
and so, and that's I'm a cancer surgeon. I'm a neurosurgeon. I'm gonna drive down this 101, to City of Hope. There is the science on that is just so rigorous and undeniable, that I think that's why I love this book. Is there's things you're gonna think are no way and yes way, and the things you're gonna say like, oh, I assumed that to be, but no, it's not true. So just stay with the lucid dreaming thing. That's one. Then number two, it can be cultivated physiologically. We put people on some Alzheimer's medicine. They come back and they say we're having a lot more lucid dreams. So whenever a chemical increases a dream pattern, there's,
Malaria pills as well.
you know what? That's the chapter that I didn't write was the
Right.
effects of drugs on dreams because
Yeah.
I couldn't find any patterns for
Yeah.
it. And and then so now what people can do is they can try to develop the ability to lucid dream, and there's some techniques that are in the book that I'm not familiar with. And what I liked about it was they weren't just saying, hey, by the way, last night I was lucid dreaming 3 times. They said, come back in the lab, prove it you're asleep with those sleep spindles, and now communicate with our eye Morse code
So we know you can hear us.
at an increased rate while asleep, that you've actually developed the ability to lucid dream. I like that kind of, hey,
Yeah.
prove it to us.
Right.
So what is the benefit of lucid dreaming?
Well,
Well, I would like to speak to that because
Yeah.
one of the methods in here is yoga nidra is one of the methods for getting into lucid. Have you ever done yoga nidra?
Yeah.
So that's what it is. Yoga nidra is putting your body to sleep while keeping your mind awake. And in the yoga nidra that I do, she keeps saying, "Do not sleep. Do not sleep." And she takes you through a whole, and he describes it in the book. You go through an entire body calming down elaborate exercise. My yoga nidra, it takes like 40 minutes. Like it's a thing. And you're trying to get to that state. I never thought of it as I'm in the lucid dreaming phase, but you get into this very sleepy, strange, you almost feel like your body can't move, like it's asleep, but you're still able to listen to her words. I haven't had like dreaming experience. I've fallen asleep sometimes, but that's not lucid dreaming.
My experience of this, which again, I never associate with lucid dreaming, but I think there's some overlap here, is that I have, when I started as a teenager doing somatic energy work, and people would lie on a massage table and they would often, through relaxation, quickly go into what I call it a still point, which is that space in between awake and asleep where they're way off, experiencing vision and emotion and heightened emotion and often memory, but they're still somewhat aware. Now,
not
I don't
completely
know,
unconscious, yeah.
not completely unconscious, because they can, and they kind of shift in and out of that space, sometimes going deeper into one, sometimes coming up, and you can have intense emotional processing happen in there.
And what I would say is that I don't know the exact details and the terminology, but for those who are listening, if you look at 24 hours and you start to see these things that are, if we get away from thinking about it, the brain as hardwired, but more as 100 billion-ish jellyfish that are creating these worlds of electricity that we can measure, it's easier to understand that during the day, people with narcolepsy could just quickly fall asleep and have some unique experiences, emotions, thoughts, and feelings during that time. That shouldn't feel fringe. Or if you haven't slept for 2 days, you're going to have some different feelings. In surgical training, we 36-hour shifts 3 times a week. So sleep deprivation does things. Sleep entry is not a millisecond phenomenon. Salvador Dali wrote about it as a place where he could extract clever ideas. Lucid dreaming in the middle is the return of awareness. And what I like about it is, this is dope. Remember I mentioned the dreaming brain, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex that does math is dampened, and we see very few dream reports of math. That all fits. People who lucid dream in fMRI machines, that area has more activity. So it's consistent that awareness in the executive sense is returning in what they're describing, and also in the brain activity. Like that's rigorous.
It's unbelievable.
And then people, when they wake up, like sleep paralysis, a third of people have these like they're being violated and they're demons. It's so consistent that different cultures have set up the same story for it. And so, and then you wake up, and then you have different experiences. You can do, transcendental, you can meditate and have different thoughts and creativity during the day. You can have too many espressos and have different. So if you just realize that in a 24-hour cycle, it's not on off, it's not hardwired, and that cognition, whether it's the waking brain or the sleeping brain, it's fluid, And I think that, to me, that's liberating. That at any time I might find a clever idea. Like I listen to a lot of rap music in my car, and when the beats get into a certain rhythm, I have different thinking. So I have my own rituals to try to find the nuggets that I can't sitting in front of a laptop with a triple espresso. Right? That's meant for a different type of thinking. That's my take on it.
I want to touch more on that in a second, but to wrap lucid dreaming, have people reported any physiological differences from lucid dreaming to regular sleep? More energy, more clarity, emotional processing?
Not a measurement, but surveys and reporting that it tends to be an overall positive experience. Some of the ways that people lucid dream, you have to disrupt sleep, so you got to be a little careful about that, like wake up before you would and then try to, in the morning, like an hour and a half earlier, and then go back to bed, but don't let yourself fall fully asleep. So there's a certain luxury you have to have. You're right.
Yeah.
If you're just trying to get the
explore
kids to
that.
school, you may not have that luxury, or you may do it on a vacation. But sleep disruptions are a concern. It tends to be overall positive. It can be cultivated. It's rigorously proven. A third of people report it on their own. And I think it speaks to the brain and mind in a way that should excite people for what's still undiscovered.
I wonder if it's also touching on the cusp of, when you're having a nightmare or a bad dream and you wake yourself up, right? There's that in-between space,
Very
right?
good point.
Where I'm able to say,
Arousal.
right, where I'm able to say like, oh,
And
I
degrees of arousal.
don't want to see what's about to happen. I'm going to wake myself up. So people who are lucid dreaming are possibly in that liminal space and able to kind of hold that.
If I may, when you're asleep, you're not, if you smell smoke, you will wake up. The doors aren't completely shut to your mind. If you hear an alarm, you will wake up. So perception is dampened, and there's a central structure called the thalamus that lets things filter up, and it controls movements heading down. And if people have a little bit of injury to that area, for the first few months, they report more lucid dreaming.
Interesting.
So
that filtration, yeah.
Right, and that there's a thermostat for arousal even when we're asleep, because you won't sleep through a fire or a massive alarm going off, so you're not completely shut down. And the degree to that arousal, maybe you're modulating it on your own. Maybe a night where it's waking you up like an alarm. Maybe lucid dreamers have cultivated that. But that's rigorous. This is not...
I knew someone, I was having nightmares at the time, and I would tell a friend that I was having it, and she was like, well, just tell yourself not to do that.
Okay, so that's
She was
interesting.
able to stop her nightmares like that and just say, I'm not doing that.
So what I did find with that was, people can search this, is part of the cognitive therapeutic techniques for nightmare disorders is actually re-scripting a nightmare by repeatedly thinking of having a more favorable ending. I think, come on. But that's out there, and that is effective. So the waking mind can influence the dreaming mind even in the most wild type of dream called a nightmare. So I just like leaving it not completely on off.
Talk a little bit more about the importance of creative imagination and how we can increase problem solving and access to that creative imagination by utilizing our transition points in and out of sleep.
For something to be creative, it has to be clever and useful. You can't be like, I had a creative idea as an electric car, and what's already out there? You gotta like, you know what I mean? So you gotta be a student. You gotta know to be creative. You gotta know all the dots before you can come up with new ways to connect the dots. So I think when we talk about creativity, which is really the thing I value most in my life now, is idea generation. Okay, I'm a specialist at bad idea generation, and they happen for me in the morning, because I have the luxury now of a bed and being able to set the time or not set the time to wake up. But before I go on Instagram, I go to my notes app, and whatever I'm thinking in the morning, I did that this morning too. I think I got up before. I just stay in bed, and like 5 or 6, and I don't know, whatever I was thinking during that time, that was definitely different. Not necessarily psychedelic or way out there. They weren't any like, purple elephants and stuff like that, but it's just a different way of thinking about the problems that I'm rolling around in my mind. And then I always write things down when I get up. I put down a few thoughts. And then like at the end of the week, I look at it, I'm like, bad idea, bad idea, bad idea. Oh, that's interesting. And so idea generation toward creativity or toward anything, toward a relationship, toward employment of any sort, for me, the sleep exit window is very important for that. Dolly wrote, and so did Edison, like in that movie,
Inception.
Yeah, so that the falling chair thing, that's how the feeling of falling will pop you out of your dream state, falling asleep state, and that's what Dolly and Edison did. They put their notebooks, which is cool, right? 'Cause now you have the science to explain, like Dolly, Edison, Aristotle. They put their notebook, they're working on something, and they'd have like a key in their hand and a metal thing, and they'd drift off to sleep, and the key would hit the metal pan, they'd wake up, and they'd quickly write down what they're thinking. Like, that's out there, magic craftsmanship. You can get that on Amazon.
Talking about Edison and this idea of basically extending the window.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not having your experience of dreams, it's potentially you're lowering your executive functioning side, and so that you're able to harness a whole host of creative options. And in that state, you're able to really, you're just harvesting in there.
Not for everyone and not every time, but it is possible and it can be cultivated.
I want to talk about people who don't remember dreams or don't have access to any of this. Because, like, you're telling me all these things. Those things, nothing's in there except like the shit that I did wrong, over the last 20 years. Yeah. Nothing's in there. I very, very rarely remember my dreams. I know that I'm having them. I very, very rarely remember them. When I do have them, they're usually like horrible and bad. Like all these things, even lucid dreaming, I'm like, there's nothing to go in there.
So I have cancer patients, and a lot of them didn't have a lot of dream recall in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. But when they face that, end-of-life dreams arrive or shepherd them. They tend to be favorable. You would think they're going to have nightmares. Cancer surgery, cancer treatment equals nightmares. No, end-of-life. So then you have the nightmares that arrive for all children, even the ones that, have the mildest upbringing. So the longitudinal pattern, like right now, there's been windows I'm like, well, I'm just shut down, right? But the pattern of dreaming and recall changes throughout life. And what I will say is that there are reports and there are surveys, I don't have measurements for it, but people do have increased dream recall. They journal what they're thinking about going to bed. They slow down when they wake up. Does that mean every time? Does that mean every solution's there? But even if that's just a 5% capacity, isn't that great that it's free? It's personalized to you, and that's the ultimate biohack that we haven't ever thought about. And I like leaving those windows open for people, if not now, but maybe at some point in your life, just to know, like, that's how that works. Dolly tried it. Oh, it didn't work for you? Okay. But, that's there for those who are able to access it. And even if you can't get to it now, that at a different time in your life, dreams will serve different purposes.
When I've had like the wake up and like, oh, what am I thinking? It's always something like really insane. Like I'm falling off a cliff or, like
Me too.
it doesn't seem creative or useful or like, what if this happened? Like I can't imagine. And again, there's different kinds of brains. I can't imagine that being like, oh, that's so useful. I'm going to make a painting of it.
I don't think it's metaphorical. I don't think it's linear. I think it's, imagine the neurons that would be lost that serve a greater function if you didn't wild out in your dreams. I think it's sort of a preservation of capacity, not a last night I had this dream and that equals this solution.
Well, explain what's happening in problem solving. So when I was a full-time writer, I used to say I would hit a wall in what I was doing, and the best thing I could possibly do was take a walk without any stimulation or a nap. And once I had a nap, I would wake up, I'd be like, oh, I need to go this way, not the other way.
And there are surveys of people, it tends to be visual spatial, like Tetris in video games, different things. Again, visual spatial components, that they'll nap or they'll use sleep as a way to, those who nap did better on this. There's a lot of that out there. I'd encourage people to look into that. I can't prove it. I do believe it. But back to your point about creativity, the people are like, oh, dream sharing. I was like, the last thing I want to share are my dreams. Like that's a wild space. But I think it speaks to a preservation of capacity. I've seen so much, whether it's addiction, cancer treatment, chemo fog, brain injury, that brains are injured, minds are not working, but there is rehab for the injured. If the injured brain and the injured mind can recover through certain steps, why can't those steps be applied to all of us? And I think that's the big theme of my first book is that there is recovery of the injured brain, and it doesn't grow new neurons. The neurons you have repurpose. It's not that like the liver resprouts and fills the space. So I like leaving all of that for people to know that it's possible. It's possible. I think that's the biggest message, is that it's possible within some constraints, and I'm trying to share those with you.
I want to ask you, both as a human and as a neurosurgeon, what is up with precognitive dreams? Because there is a field of study, and you and I would agree, it is not quantifiable, it's not qualifiable, but it's fascinating.
Precognitive meaning dreams that predict the future.
People who believe that there is a way to tap into some aspect of us that understands things that in many cases have not happened. So I'll give you a basic example, and then I'll give you a more elaborate one. There is a case, and there are several like this, but there's one case in particular of a man who dreamt all 6 lottery numbers that were needed to win the lottery, and he did win the lottery. Now, there may have been a million times before that he dreamt of 6 other numbers, but that time he dreamt of 6, and the probability is like 1 in like 600,000. Like it's big, but not impossible.
Or he won, then he filled in the story backward.
No. So there are people who study this where it is documented, right? Where it's documented beforehand. So
I need to make friends with that guy.
Right, well, exactly. But
there's at least one unicorn has been seen, so we have to
correct.
address it.
And there are people, Julia Mossbridge, who we're speaking to. She is a person who studies this. She studies, can you kind of train the brain to have dreams that in many cases have windows into, again, the future. The other example, which is more elaborate, is Elizabeth Crone, who we had on our podcast. And she was struck by lightning, and she came back from 2 minutes on the pavement. She came back with a variety of, she became synesthetic.
We're seeding his next book.
And what she started having happen, though, was she would have a variety of, she didn't call them dreams. She said that they felt different than dreams and that they felt like visions is what she called them. She started cataloging them. And while there are many that did not come true, she cataloged them with timestamps and emailed herself. And in several cases, she was having a vision of an airplane crash that occurred. She dreamt the Sully Sullenberger flight. She
I
pictured,
met him once, actually. He's quite the man.
so she dreamt that plane on the water, and typed it out, timestamped to herself. She would dream flights with the number of people killed. Like 320 people were killed in a flight. And I'm seeing the letters WA. It's either TWA or UW. She's dreaming things that, again, are time-stamped. We cannot wrap our heads around this because unless you say there is a plane of consciousness of all things that were, are, and will be, do you have any understanding of what precognitive dreaming might actually be?
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. A precognitive dream is the fancy way of dreams that predict the future. It makes sense if it's a couple thousand years ago and you're lying down and physiologically you're thinking the brain is cold and the body's cold. Now, after our discussion from measurements, we know the body's a little cooler and the brain inside the skull is burning hot. So when it was assumed that was cold flesh and you'd wake up, you're like, I just went through, the most exciting, wild, dangerous time of my life. It had to come from extracranial, from God's omen. That kind of makes sense to me. We just had the wildest experience because you think of sleep as a time of rest.
Right.
Rest is not an inactivity. It's just a different type of activity. It's a car going forward and backwards. It doesn't the brain's never off. So in that state, people, I think, started to think, okay, wait, the things I am dreaming about may offer me a clue to what is about to happen in a war or in a marriage and these sort of things. I totally get that. But I don't have, other than that dream enactment behavior that predicts Parkinson's when you attack your bed partner, that is the only precognitive dreaming pattern that predicts a future disease. But I just don't have information on that. I'm not saying no.
And I don't even know how we gather it because much of it is, like you said, it's unicorn experiences.
And one unicorn is all you need. But I think it would take for me somebody to hold up the newspaper or whatever and say, look, later this year, I would need to see it. And I haven't. And I've searched for it because, as I said in this book, I didn't want to poo-poo things. I gave Lucid Dreaming 2 chapters. I gave Precognitive Dreams are mentioned in there. But I just don't know. But yet, the electrical strikes and savants, let's leave that into a more absolutely provable. So there's some things here. Why would people would think dreams are omens? What you mentioned, where she's writing things down and emailing her, I don't have evidence of that. Can electricity change the brain and mind? Absolutely.
Right.
And so I just want to touch on that briefly. If you do imagine that every neuron is a jellyfish and it generates its own electricity, much like an electrical eel, they're like sodium channels, but glucose is used to separate ions like a battery. And when, like lithium is used for bipolar disorder, it's a molecular battery. The electricity that's generated creates a mind, creates consciousness. Sometimes the depression can get so bad that at some elite centers, we will place electrodes on the surface of the scalp, not to measure, but to activate a seizure, a mini lightning bolt, if you will. And they wake up in a few weeks and they're lifted out of depression. So I'm trying to leave people with an understanding. Electricity, lightning bolts, the unicorns for savants, we've seen it. Electricity is used to lift depression with shock therapy. There's some issues with that in the past. We've seen it. And then if I could expand it to be electrochemical, those neurons, they're spraying chemicals at each other. And the thing that's really got me thinking about things lately is how is it somebody can think about self-harm to the point of suicide and they take a sniff of ketamine? And that's the treatment in hospitals. If you come in with suicidal ideation and the mechanism to set it up, they'll bring you in the hospitals and they'll give you ketamine, and it'll stop you from wanting to kill yourself. And so I'm trying to understand what's in that chemical, what it's doing inside the brain, how it's changing the electricity, lightning bolts to shock therapy to sniffing ketamine. That's all science. It can feel like it's overlapping, but that's real.
And for us, and sort of what we get to do on this podcast is find that intersection between what's the facts, what's the fantasy, right? And I think one of the things that, you said that we're generating consciousness. Many people believe that consciousness is this thing out here, right? That our mind and brain are having access to and sort of pulling, from some sort of quantum network. if that were the case, I could see people saying, oh yeah, precognitive dreams, it makes sense. Because we're traveling outside of this conscious experience, as you say, behind the skull, to be able to access something that's already out there. I mean, it's
Fair.
out there.
Fair. They asked me about that on NPR. And my understanding is reality is reality, and we all have different sensors for it. Like, you know, our dog is super smart. She can smell when you're being disingenuous, like, hey, come here for a treat. And she's like, you're going to try to put me in the cage and leave for the evening.
She knows.
And it's like, how do you know that? Like, so instinct, hunch, mammalian brain, animals, the way that wolves mourn. I mean, there's something there. And so I try not to think of consciousness. It's a tough one because I can't tell you who is conscious, but I can't tell you when the brain is working fine, but I can tell you when the brain's not working. It has no electricity. So whether the electricity that's measured and the experiences I've had, I remember, I don't think that's required to say that there's consciousness, you know? So it's just a big space, but I see it in species. You see it in animals, you see it in people. But only thing I can comment about consciousness is, you know, when we put people under anesthesia or when people have brain death, there's no consciousness. And that if there is something external that we are potentially perceiving, it requires electrical activity within our skull.
Okay, so there was just a huge article in, I think it was in Harper's, about a woman whose son was in a horrible car accident and he was declared to be in what we used to call a vegetative state.
It's a rough word, but yeah.
Right, but there's now a new designation that they're saying that there is perception and there's perceptive ability, and this woman for 39 years has taken care of this son of hers who many people would have said, pull the plug.
Was there electrical activity in his brain?
Well, so this is the thing. Back when the accident happened, they weren't even examining these things. Can you talk a little bit about what's changed, even in the time that you've been a surgeon, in terms of our ability to say, we're going to pull the plug on this person, or there may be perceptual and perceptual ability? That was a hard one.
Yeah, it's a big question. It's an important one.
Yeah.
The first one to start with is locked-in syndrome. I read about it in something else. So you're completely there, but all you can do is move your eyes, much like in lucid dreaming.
Right.
So I try to, and so you're there. And in the beginning, when they were writing about it, you know, they would say the person's not moving.
Right.
You know, they'd start an IV and they wouldn't flinch.
I mean, how many people were declared dead when they weren't?
Your heart can beat for a few days, even when there's no blood flow going into your skull. It's got automaticity. And if we put you on a breathing machine, the heart can go for a little while. So death, this is a big topic. Death, I don't believe death is cardiac death. I believe death is the electrical silencing of brain activity. And there are some rigorous, I need some time for this one. There are some rigorous science papers coming out about older folks who say, don't resuscitate me. It's called DNR. They've got those surface electrodes going on. The heart is stopped. The little EKG is gone. The pulse is gone. But for 3 minutes after, which would be technically cardiac death and time of death, there's an explosion of brain activity.
Whoa.
It doesn't go out in a whimper. The last thing the brain does is just launch all the neurotransmitters, launch all the electricity. Now, so for some people who are resuscitated and they see, I saw my whole life story spanning across, it's consistent now, the near-death experiences. Right. Yeah. Now we know that a couple of minutes afterwards, you're having the wildest, your brain's on fire. So if you're resuscitated and you say, look, I saw my whole life pass before me, expansive memories.
They meet God.
Yeah, but if it makes sense because your brain dies a few minutes after your heart dies. That's new. That's like the last 4. And what I like about it is those electrical patterns are like wild dreams. So maybe death is one last dream. So that's romantic, that's poetic, but I've got measurements for you in the book, and it's searchable. The Guardian did a whole piece on that.
Yep.
So that's one space. So when you talk about death, that itself is, we may have gotten it wrong thinking death is when the heart stops beating. Then back to the stages of brain injury. death is the way they used to figure it out is there's no electrical activity. So those people with locked in syndrome that are totally there but can only move their eyes, they would put the surface electrodes and go, whoa, this is wild. So they were like, okay, these aren't the people. These people are not on the brink of death. And then the other definition of death is they started putting dye. We used to shoot dye into the carotid, and when there's no blood flow going from the four arteries from your heart to your skull, the lack of blood flow equals brain death. The lack of electrical activity equals brain death. So there's some very clear things there, and that fits, right? Because that's what we're seeing with those people whose hearts have died and there's still electrical activity. So likely brain death is a few minutes after cardiac death. So those precious moments when you're walking away from a loved one, maybe hold on a little longer. So that's over here. Then the brain can be injured in so many different ways. And that I think we were getting it wrong for so long with these persistent states that depending on where the injury was, it's not just that they're not moving. And it's not just that you think they're not perceiving, that there are different types of brain injury, and there's stages of coma, stages of brain injury, stages of perception. And to better understand how that works now is we're using MRIs and the electrical activity, and they have a better sense of, stay with me, is that if in the stalk, there's a reticular activating system that does consciousness. If there's an injury to if the brain's like a mushroom and there's a stalk, if there's an injury to the stalk, that leans more that there cannot be perception or activity. If there are injuries to the cortical canopy, I mean, you definitely you can have perception and emotion and experience even though you're not moving. So it's not a field I'm in. I'm not in neurology. I'm in neurosurgery. But that's a great question that those are the lessons we're learning now. And then if I can, different spots of the brain being dampened or activated, and then the resultant mind that happens kind of reminds you just a 24-hour cycle of waking and sleeping is never fully on, never fully off, but different symphonies are having their chance at creating the mind.
That's what Dr. Bruce Grayson talks about in terms of the filtering in a near-death experience. He says the filtering that we carry out in normal everyday life is totally altered, and therefore maybe it's an explosion of brain activity that people are just having experiences. And there are so many commonalities
right
through those experiences, which is fascinating. Like, and he says that they're all often cultural, like I'm going to cross a bridge or a river.
Very good.
And that depends on where you are in the world.
Which is interesting because sleep exit, people have come up for that negative experience. They've come up with overlapping stories based on where they're at. And near-death experiences, the tunnel is more likely from low blood flow to the optic arteries so when people, so that was more mechanical.
Interesting.
Right. That was more mechanical.
Well, he was also saying if people have a near-death experience and they've never lived near a tunnel, they wouldn't know what a tunnel is. So often they'll be like, oh, things were closing in. But that's interesting because it could be a visual, which is also, there's a form of meditation that involves allowing the focal, your focal field, visual field closes in. And
patients get low blood pressure, operating in other areas. The concern is not just that the brain is not going to get enough blood flows, but that the eye isn't. So I think that the tunnel is likely how the vision collapses with low blood flow. That feels more mechanical to me.
I like that, though.
But
we have to make meaning of it because we have a brain.
Well, we're going to keep trying.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Actually, meaning making is a fascinating topic.
Right.
But and then my whole life played out, expansive memory, like a film strip of their life. That kind of seems we're just vibing. That seems consistent with the robust brain electrical activity that happens in the few minutes before you actually have brain death, like that. Because most people think, well, you're dying. Why would you have such a rich experience? But brain death is the brain doesn't whimper into the night.
It's like, because you're never going to eat chocolate again. You might as well have something positive happen.
Yeah, this is the time to indulge.
If you put on, again, just vibing, but if you put on your philosophical hat, what do you think that purpose of that explosion is?
It's fascinating.
To look across our lives like that. A lot of people say they come back and they're softened in a way. Their heart is broken open. They have huge spiritual changes where they were once aggressive. What do you think that's about?
I would say that intense experiences. So there's this learning, I think, can happen like sort of glacially, and then there can be sort of rock bottom and like instant life-changing events and transformations, whether it's lightning bolts or something that happened with your child who gets sick. That's there. So people who have that experience and come back, that they're transformed just makes sense to me. That's like how tell me the one that isn't transformed. The 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 other part is it's a little trickier about, what happens with death and how people react to that. It's, I don't have a firm understanding of that. Because a lot of the patients I'm taking care of, with a few exceptions, they're either injured or have asked to be sedated during that process. So it's not always a clear thing.
Yeah.
And except that I did have a patient with locked-in syndrome, and because they don't feel pain, they didn't require the degree of anesthesia or morphine during their time of exit. So what I've tried to do is look for those unicorns and stories and answer it from that point of view. But the transformation of the human mind with certain experiences, I think, speaks again to that cognition and the mind created from this flesh, because it's electrically based. It can be jolted into a different way of thinking, and that there's evidence from people hitting rock bottom with addiction. There's evidence of heartbreak. There's evidence of my patients with children pass away. There's evidence of lightning bolts and savants, even if it's a few. There's evidence of shock therapy where they're lifted out of depression. It's like, what are we doing? The flesh is the same. And then now with ketamine, it's like, what is this thing that the brain structure is the same? Actually, the electricity is the same. But the mind that comes from that flesh, from the same electrical pattern, it does not want to hurt themselves. So I like leaving those pieces open for people to connect.
It's interesting to me. I would have assumed that for the mind to change, some of the electrical pattern would have changed.
No, okay. That's a big question too. So some people have injured brains and healthy minds, and some people have like beautiful flesh brain, like just beautiful. Just the anatomy and architecture is pristine, and they don't have healthy minds. And then, however you want to define that, these are just concepts. And then some people are not doing well. They're mentally not doing well, and some people are doing fantastic. But the electrical patterns, stay with me, they don't really predict mood and affect. They predict, are you awake? Are you on triple espresso? Are you meditating? Are you asleep? So they give us like the global states, but the individual experience within those, which is coming back to what you said, if you're having a rough day, the dreaming process, all the electricity is going to look the same in our brains, but you had a rough day. The dream that your brain conjures is going to be different. So that's I love thinking about things like that.
Can you tell us what you've learned about how to influence our dreams?
Waking mind feeds dreaming mind feeds waking mind to different degrees. Obviously, you add imagination to it. Obviously, you add memory to it. That said, the people who write about this the most is during the sleep entry period, that the things they try to think about, and I think Dolly is the best example of this, but for me, sleep exit is a better time for me to hold on to fresh thoughts or idea generate. But people do, not every time, not every person, not every stage of our life, there are consistent reports that the things they toggle in their mind as they fall asleep can sometimes, when you have the aha moment the next day, it's not really an aha moment. The imagination network was working on it through the dreaming process. So that's possible, and that's where journaling comes in. When I was younger, in my 30s, I remember removing like a cancer from anatomy, and it's a very visual thing. It's like scuba diving and navigating and flying spaceships. You don't know what's around this. It's a visual spatial thing. I used to look at the brain scans of the tumors within the brain, and before I go to bed, just a little, pop it in my brain a little bit. And I never, and the question I got asked was, do you dream of doing surgery? Never, not a single time. But I have a lot of visual spatial dreams, driving fast, flying fast.
So you're navigating
It's
visual
always
spatial.
visual spatial.
Interesting.
And then awkward social things and...
Well, and I guess the question is also, is that why you became a neurosurgeon, right? Like, which comes first,
No, I mean, I just fumbled forward, yeah. But
but I'm saying you have the predisposition. Like, I went to graduate school for neuroscience, but I had shaky hands. I wasn't going to be a surgeon, right?
Well, what happened
There's
for
something
me-
about you that made you a person who can navigate this way.
Well, fair. Maybe I was, but fair.
Yeah.
When I got to medical school, I wasn't really interested. For me, again, not to be negative or disparage anybody, I didn't really get like, I'm going to write you a prescription and a prescription that somebody else could write. And the first time I saw surgery, I was like, wow, first, this person does that for you. And then there were some surgeons in big centers where they could do a surgery that other surgeons couldn't. So I was like, wait, your hands are medicine that doesn't exist anywhere outside of you? Like, to me, it went that way for me. And then I was like, oh, I get all this visual spatial stuff, but I don't want to look at laboratories and like, I'm not that, I did enough of it to become a neurosurgeon, but I like performing under pressure, visuospatial, and whether I dream of that now after going into it, or maybe those are my dreams that made you go, hey, you could be good at this.
Did you play sports growing up?
Not really. I just got in a lot of trouble. I used to, I grew up here in Los Angeles. I didn't play sports growing up, but from a young age, I was good with my hands, with fixing things. I like driving fast. I liked, I like pressure situations. And you select for that.
Oh, yeah. So this is the thing, with all due respect. The thing that we say about people who went to med school for neurosurgery, they're like fighter pilots. You have to be so incredibly confident.
If you don't like that thrill, you're
Correct.
going to... So first, the bifurcation is very straight in medical school. It's procedures or not.
Yeah.
And then, and most is not. And then it's, what I say is, first thing that you want to know, and then it's dangerous procedures or not dangerous procedures.
No,
There's a lot of not
holding-
dangerous procedures, right?
You're holding life in your hands.
Yeah, or for sure, actually, for sure. And it brings out something in me that I think other responsibilities would not have. I think I would have been, I think I would have been a disinterested XYZ.
Yeah.
But in this thing, because it's intense, it engages me, and it gave me a sense of identity and a master class in humanity. So the career has definitely shaped me.
It's also a huge responsibility to have that role in someone's life.
I think that's the thing that often goes unsaid is, I don't know where I was just in London. I said, I've met over 7,000 people. And I don't mean just like, hey, peace. It's met them, shook hands, engaged them in some capacity. Out of those, a few thousand I've operated on. And that's a longer interaction. And just think about meeting somebody in their time of crisis, and in about 20 minutes, they're signing over 2 weeks from now, 1 week from now, go ahead and open my skull. I gave you permission. I want you to do that. That you develop, there's a master class there for someone who's willing to look at it. And so while I'm 52 now, while I was, from 35 to, for the last 25 years, really, I was always enjoying that part, holding on to those nuggets. And I realized that the physical craft is a thrill for me, but it was also, where else would I have gotten all this content for this publishing career that just started 5 years ago, right? Like, where are you gonna get the dots? So I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled about how my life turned out.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I also think about, and this kind of relates to the conversations about dreaming and what we dream about. I'm thinking also, what would your brain have done 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago? What would his brain as a writer and a creative have been like? And it's kind of like dreams are this window into
Invent the wheel,
right?
Bow and arrow.
Right.
I actually wrote about that, like kinesthetic creativity. Like, I know we think of creativity as like Pixar or whatever, like Hollywood, which is important, but like, isn't like tying a knot, like the most creative thing ever.
Wildly creative.
Right? Or the wheel or a bow and arrow. Like, so maybe that it was creativity that led us to outcompete or whatever that was with the Neanderthals, because they had bigger brains. They had more of that cortical canopy. So maybe it was a wild dream life. Maybe it was more imagination that led us to come up with tools. And the way, and sometimes with surgery, it just feels like it's being released. It's not step one, step two. It's a performance. And then you start to look at dance and you start to look at these things. And then maybe it was kinesthetic creativity that led to the earlier tools. And they got a bunch of stuff about putting people in brain scans with learning how to tie knots and undo knots. Like, it's some complex stuff going on with making knots out of rope. And maybe that's what our ancestors got right. And that's why we're
I don't
here
think
now.
it's maybe at all.
All right.
Creativity is, for me, any way of looking at something differently and having an outcome that then is designed by a different approach to the problem. And applied creativity. A lot of athletes talk about the creativity in their sport and that sort of trance-like state that they can enter once they've developed the biomechanics of the sport. Then
After mastery.
Correct.
Yeah. And they as a group, they have more lucid dreams. Athletes.
Interesting.
Really?
Yeah, the whole visual spatial thing leans lucid dreaming, more nightmares and creative people. Those are links.
Yeah, and you also have to look at sort of what are the other factors. Who are the kind of people who are creative? You could actually be seeing that people who are highly emotional, right, are having these kinds of
or
dream
you're in an environment where your
experiences.
dad just hooked you up with the right job.
Right.
There's a lot of factors there, but
Yeah.
visual spatial, kinesthetic movement, creativity, dance, athletes, lucid dreaming. There's some clustering there. That's an interesting conversation point, you know.
Can we talk about AI for a minute? And have you seen any ways that AI is changing dreaming? There are some companies that try and influence with scent or with images or with light, and then also how they're trying to map the brain to see if they can interpret what people are dreaming about.
I'm not an expert at this. There's a chapter on this, but there's some very concerning developments. So we talked about the thalamus being a filter. Like, you're never off, right? And so what happens is, whether it's an alarm or it's a smell, they're trying to like have people smell something and they play a certain sound, or they actually show a commercial. Like Burger King was involved in this kind of marketing strategy to see if it'll change their sales behavior when they're awake.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Yeah, it is a little bit, right. And now we've got all these gizmos and things that are recording. You got the Apple Watch or the sleep thing, that it wouldn't be a stretch in the next handful of years. I'm not talking like, this isn't like Blade Runner, 30 years from now. But like, if they start to figure out when you're in deeper sleep versus REM sleep, because there's some patterns that they could pulse a certain sound or different thing that would influence, not control, but influence your behavior. I think that's a space that needs to be looked at. You may know about this already. It's called neural rights. Like, people are like, hey, that data is even more precious than the daytime data because our guard is down.
Yeah. Well, and I was also thinking there's kind of nervous system regulator devices that sort of throughout the day give intermittent, kind of buzzing to try and sort of train the nervous system. So I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I would just like to stay asleep so I can remember my dreams.
I mean, you can imagine this is the Black Mirror version of it, but I actually don't think it's so far off that someone could give consent to have their device play sound auditory cues that could link to a commercial in their waking life, making them more predisposed to want that commercial. Because, as you said, we're always, the waking life and the dreaming life are merged in some way. So if we experience something in our dream life...
That marketing strategy is out there. It's in the second to last chapter of this book. That marketing strategy is already being tested. That's not like...
Tested, but they're not like widespread. People can sign up and sort of agree to this
not
in
yet,
their
but
homes.
Sufficiently, it's has advanced sufficiently to where different neuroscience societies across different countries have tried to come up with like the 10 commandments of please don't do this. And so it's that's what lucid dreaming, you think it's going to be woo-woo. It's not. This thing sounds like you're a writer trying to come up with your next pitch. No, like, this is already happening. So I think that's why it's important to have the language and the understanding in how to decipher a lot of this neuro stuff that's coming our way.
There was an episode of Black Mirror where a woman is basically put into a state And to be brought out of that state, you have to pay the company. But if you don't pay at the highest level, you get commercial breaks. So she's in the middle of her life. She's like working with
the
a
cheap
kid.
Netflix. No, I know what you mean.
So this 8-year-old at school is like, my parents got into a fight, and she's like, if you're considering depression, please call. And they're like, what? She's like, are you considering suicide? And he's like, I'm 8 years old. And the notion was, when they go to the company's like, oh, you wanted the ad-free? You're going to need to pay more.
I love that.
It was Tracy Ellis Ross plays the executive, and it's horrible, but also it's like, oh my gosh, that's not a world I could imagine that we live in.
It's like I watch Tubi, and they've got, it's free, but the commercials are like a part of it.
Yeah.
So if you don't have resources,
that's right.
You're gonna end up.
Well, and that's
you're
what
gonna have
it
brain
was.
training that's constantly interrupted.
But what this brings up is for people who, let's say, need money, right? We already know people sell blood, people sell their eggs, they sell their
sleep next.
They sell their womb. Like, are you selling data, right?
And we just took a dark turn.
I don't think it's dark. I just think it's. We talked about brain death. We talked about. I just think this is why I love what I do, because we couldn't have this conversation talking about knees and hearts and my gut microbiome. Like, I'm not disparaging them, but it's a very narrow lane from which to understand humanity. Whereas we've been all over today. I think so. It's not dark to me. It's exciting.
The darkness for me is the concern
the
about
exploitative element.
The exploitative element, and basically the corporations that are going to roll this out do not have a great track record in safeguarding human well-being.
And I would say that is not dark, but that is right on point. They can't be left to be
monitor
to be
themselves.
kind.
No,
they can't be left to self-police that. And so just to return you're not completely out when you're dreaming. You're not completely paralyzed when you're dreaming. And it seems to be that we're in a more perceptive or more vulnerable to suggestions that are made to our ears and nose in the dreaming state. I just leave it at that. You guys can look it up, but so if it's a more vulnerable state where your guard is down, it needs a little bit of extra attention.
Yep.
Well, I think that's also a great reason not to sleep with the TV on.
Well, I fall asleep with Netflix all the time, and but it's a little bit like insomnia. People are like, how do you, well, it's not everybody has insomnia. If you slam 3 espressos, fall asleep with a laptop on, you sleep well, you don't have insomnia. But if some people...
you don't know how well you could be sleeping if you're sleeping with a laptop.
What if I'm watching that show, falling asleep all the time?
Well, I actually, when I was watching Black Mirror, it definitely...
It affected your mood
it gets,
I
love crime documentaries, but I now only listen to them
though.
in the day.
So she had the experience where she was watching crime documentaries before bed, and then she was having more nightmares. So
I was having disrupted and dysregulated sleep, but yes.
So we saw that change.
But not more, you weren't committing more crime.
I was not committing crimes in my sleep, no. I want to ask a question about dream interpretation.
Okay, yeah.
Obviously, this has been the foray of psychology, right? It's like Freudian, and what are all these, like, what do dreams mean? You do talk about it here, though. I found it really fascinating that so much of dreams, whether you grow up in a technological culture, a non-technological culture, the themes are very similar, right? The themes are falling. Well, you can tell me. There's like 5 main themes, right? Falling, being embarrassed in a social situation.
How do you answer? You have to answer it with what we know, and I wanted to answer it. It's the last chapter. And people may be disappointed, but based on the fact that my dreams are cooked up by my imagination and my memory, how can a wine glass be the same for the 3 of us? How can it mean the same? Because we're living such different lives. How can it even be the same as my life that I was living just like 3 years ago? And then this whole field of like addicts and recovery, and if they don't, like, there's just a report, like somebody who, it was somebody in Brazil, and he said, I knew I was headed the right direction because I didn't smoke rock in my dreams. And so, like, I love the fact that all of that stuff is out there, but dream interpret. So I want to engage it. So for that person, a crack pipe in their own life has different symbolism.
For me, it means possibility and new experiences.
For wine glass means something else. A bridge means something else. So I don't think there can be a universal symbol that applies to all humans, let alone me in my past life.
I was told like water's consciousness and you're
Yeah,
always
so
being
I-
swallowed by it. So every time I have a dream about water, I'm like, oh, it's consciousness.
I just don't see how that can. I don't see how that can happen even for me. Water's not the same thing. I've got patience. A bridge could mean end of life. A bridge could mean reconciliation. It's so personalized. I don't understand how one thing could be the same for you and me. I'll just say that off the top. That doesn't mean we can't interpret things. You were going to say?
No. Well, I was going to go to the sort of like there are similarities that seem to be shocking across cultures and different people.
Nobody wants to fall. Everybody's having nightmares about falling.
Well, so that's interesting. So those are dream patterns. The meaning.
Yeah, let's go to patterns first.
Patterns first is easier. So one of the opening thoughts that I had was your dreams are not limitless. And if you look at patterns, not my dream, or your dream, but thousands and thousands of dreams over hundreds of years, you find that reports of math and calculation are very infrequent. And you find nightmares and erotic dreams are very common. And then you get teeth falling out, being chased as common dreams. And that's held. Even it went from horse and carriage and buggy to like different continents. So there's a dreaming pattern, I think, that is built in.
Also, falling, that's one of our first reflexes, is the grasping
Very good.
reflex.
Very good.
So,
Maybe
it's one of the reflexes that goes away, but maybe falling is one of these, like nobody wants to die.
And my
that's
ancestors that didn't have falling dreams, they all
correct.
died.
They didn't, right.
What
Didn't
about
make babies.
flying? Not
Oh,
in
yes,
an
flying is
airplane,
fascinating.
but flying.
Yeah,
I used to have this dream all the time about flying, and sometimes it'd be more frequent. I haven't had it in a long time. But
And our ancestors weren't flying, so I can't explain that, but it's a pattern.
and
It's a
some
consistent dream.
consistent dream, and there's a huge difference in the dream. One version is I'm flying, but I cannot control where I'm going, and it kind of feels out of control.
It's just your life.
The other, much less
good.
frequent, was that I could control it. And when I could control the flying, it was the most
See,
amazing
then you were lucid dreaming. I don't know.
feeling of mastery. It's true. There was an element of lucid dreaming. I never thought about that because I'd be like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, you could steer it a bit. Yeah, lucid dreaming isn't like resetting the. I asked somebody who does that. Like, it's not like you completely reset the environment. You're just like, hey, I can actually drive where I'm flying or drive where I'm sailing. It's a subtle control.
Agency.
Very good.
Yeah.
I would wake
Perfect
up
word.
from those feeling like I could tackle anything, that I had just had the most amazing experience, that life was great.
So back to dream interpretation. When I was looking at this, there were some things that are obvious, like if you're nervous about giving a speech and you have a dream about showing up naked behind a podium, that's a consistent. That doesn't need interpretation. Your waking anxieties are clearly reflected in your dream anxieties or dreams. Then I noticed end of life dreams were very interesting for my cancer patients. That when your and pregnancy dreams, they're called genre dreams. When your daytime life event is so massive, it's also consistently represented, connected to your dream life. That there's it's just taking up so much space. There's no time to be imaginative. So they don't need interpretation. Then they're like junk dreams. We don't hold every thought we have to like, hey, what does that mean? You know? So just leave dreams alone a little bit.
Speak for yourself.
Oh, yeah. And then the fourth one is what I call universal dreams. Like, I really do think nightmares and erotic dreams are cultivating the mind. Do they need interpretation? That's a whole field. When you're older, you have an erotic dream about
We
somebody.
didn't bring you here to not talk about
I know,
erotic
I
dreams. So I do want to
Let's give
talk
you
about it
easy
because
on road.
when you say the brain is our most powerful sex organ, you're talking about it from a really interesting perspective, that the things that we can encounter in our dreams are incredibly vivid, incredibly activating, and they have so much emotional content to them. Can you talk a little bit? I mean, I think you said that like 2/3 of men report that they can have an orgasm from dreams, and 1/3 of women.
Wet dreams and stuff
Like
like
what?
that.
Yeah, like what's going on with my erotic sleep?
Yeah. Well, I don't have how much time do we have left? I don't
Just
have
a couple
I don't have a
minutes.
simple answer for that. But what I would tell you is some interesting things. In these reports, over 90% of people have erotic dreams and across different cultures. So it doesn't mean if you think you're prudish or not. It's not really about that. It's like a solar flare. There's a lot of infidelity, whether you're in a good relationship or not, like over 80%. If you change it from sex to erotic, those are that's the data coming. Those are the surveys that exist from which I extracted information.
One clarification, 80% are people dreaming about other people that they're not in a relationship with.
Cheating. But whether that's good in a relationship or not is actually based on if you're in a good relationship or not.
Right. Like, what does it mean to you? Like, to dream about an ex could mean, I really made the right decision to not be with them.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, if you're still thinking about your ex and you're dreaming about him, then you just still want to be with your ex. That was my one. And then if you're in a healthy relationship and you have infidelity dreams, but you wake up and you're like, hey, you guys are vibing. I don't think that's disruptive. It's what does it mean to have infidelity dreams in an unhealthy relationship? And people have some opinions about that. But
it's just another thing to be mad at them about when you wake up. Like, you cheated on me in my dream.
I didn't want to get involved in that for you two. I'm going to move on to that. The next one is that it tends to be they tend to report a small cluster of people. Like, it's not like some chimera, like, Pedro Pascal and Brad Pitt morphed into one, whatever it is for anybody. Like, it's people you don't even like your boss or like, it's family sometimes. So I don't know what that means, but it's a tight, tribal, narrow cluster. I don't know where I went with Pedro Pascal and Brad Pitt, but it sounds good to me. And she's like, yeah, that's all right.
She approves.
Then the thing is, like, the acts are wild, but the actors are surprisingly narrow. Those are the things I took out of that. And you can say whatever you want. But those are the surveys out there. At a biological level, you don't need self-stimulation to have an orgasm, a physiologic orgasm. Excitement from the brain can descend down and do that. That's well established. Freud and wet dreams and stuff like that. Orgasms are, they're a cerebral event. Going from touch to caress, there isn't a new nerve that you sprout, but the perception bumping into somebody in the subway versus a lover's touch lands differently in your sensory cortex. That maturation happens around the time of erotic dreams. I'm not saying they're linked, but there's starting to be a lot of coincidences, right? So I think there's some cognitive maturation with erotic dreams that may allow the development of erogenous touch that happens at that time, because you're not making a new nerve for it.
That's fascinating.
I mean, I wonder what is happening in the brain that all of a sudden it's received.
A lot of hormones.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question too, because sometimes I don't know if the hormones come first or the erotic dreams come first, but it's likely they're all intertwined.
Yeah, it's a priming system also, and you kind of talk about that in the book as well. That there's a certain performative, practical aspect to dreams, and that extends even to our romantic, experiences and our sexual
It's a guidebook,
ones.
Yeah. Maybe a guidebook for like, hey, this is what's. You don't know how good this feels, but this is where you need to be going because the species needs to procreate. I don't know.
Go search this out in your waking life.
Yeah, exactly. See how much you like that?
Yeah.
Before we let you go, what would you like people to take away from this book and kind of the work you do in general? You do such incredible education about not just the functions of the brain, but sort of what it means to understand them at the level you do. What would you like people to take away from what you do?
That's a big question. And at different stages in my life, I'm having different insights. And I think for me now at 52 with adult sons, I'm feeling like I can reinvent. I'm feeling like I can transform. I'm feeling surprisingly inquisitive and curious again. And I just want people to know that if you look at the structure of the brain, those 100 billion neurons, they don't actually touch. And they spray chemicals at each other. And if you just appreciate that and think of it as like the Christmas globe in New York, that every day you're kind of new, potentially new. And so whatever tragedy you're dealing with is not permanent. I'm not saying it's easy. And whatever triumph you're feeling at that moment is also not permanent. So based on the structure of the brain, that those neurons don't touch, and they spray chemicals, and it's an aurora borealis. It's not one spot or wires. That there's a new day for you every day, and that's what I would want people to walk away with.
That's really sweet.
It's a beautiful takeaway.
This is Why You Dream. Highly recommend it, and your other books as well. Such a pleasure to get to talk to you. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Before we recorded this episode, I told myself that I wanted to remember a dream last night.
Really?
I did.
And?
I did remember it. I don't know why. I just did.
Are you going to share with the class?
No, it wasn't very interesting. I was a teenager and I was hanging out with friends from camp. But like that was it. Like when he talks about sort of like the junkie dreams, like that was it. Like there's no meaning. It's not very interesting. I'm not painting a painting that's going to be sold for millions of dollars based on that dream. I think my brain doesn't want to do the things that your brain wants to do when it's dreaming.
I mean,
Just don't.
That's consistent with your personality. You don't like being told what to do.
I mean, I have a lot of dreams that don't fall under the creative, umbrella. I'm like speaking Spanish, which is not my native tongue. I'm speaking Hebrew. I'm translating things. I'm writing music. I'm practicing piano. Like nothing restful.
That was actually the most eye-opening part of this, the idea that sleep is not rest, that the brain, as he says, is like on fire with activity.
I mean, look, we also do feel rested when we have certain cycles of REM sleep and alcohol and pot. And we know that those things are things that disrupt REM sleep, which is going to kind of change the restfulness and how good you feel when you wake up. But I kind of feel that way about, like if you're constantly having nightmares all night, you're not going to feel so good in the morning. You feel crummy.
No, you're going to feel absolutely horrible. The popularity of this topic, other scientists have talked about sleep architecture and that how our the media that we're consuming right before bed, the fact that we're getting light in our eyes, which tells us to be awake, changes the architecture of our sleep, which is going to impact dream patterns. I definitely, this is obviously anecdotal, but I feel a difference and I notice a difference in my dream patterns. They're much busier, more frantic, less restful when I'm watching media or working right up until bed.
Right.
Like if I'm like writing and on my screen and cranking out emails, and my brain needs or benefits from like a wind down time period. And talk a little bit about like the difference that having that free time, almost unstructured brain time where we're not processing information. And it sounds like the creative network increases how important that is and the benefits.
I mean, I think he was kind of talking about how, even the notion of like the brain activity is that it's never not working. Like the only time it's not working is when it's not producing an electrical signal, So it's always working, but the question is sort of to what degree are we giving, are we giving a section of the brain the ability to say, I'm in charge now? So when we're working, when we're engaging, even on things that we enjoy or even watching TV, we're recruiting parts of the brain that, are going to take some time to relax. I mean, for many people who do meditation, what you find is that the first like 5 minutes are a little bit of a crapshoot. That's why it's nice to meditate for 5 minutes. But if you're meditating for 5 minutes and wondering why you're not feeling anything, it's because your brain is still chilling the F out from what you were doing when you hit the timer. So for many experiences where we're trying to calm the brain down, be it meditation, be it sleep. Yeah, it takes active time. And also, this is another metric that people who wear fancy rings and things, is if you fall asleep too quickly, it's actually a sign that you missed your window of optimal sleep, that you shouldn't be so exhausted that you like conk out. Also enter alcohol or pot, and the reason that many people honestly use it, nightcap. But your brain actually needs time to do its natural sort of winding down, and that's actually more optimal than just like conking to sleep. I can't remember what the window is. I remember when I used to wear my thing, I was like, oh, did I hit it? It's like between 2 and 8 minutes or something.
Yeah, I think it's like under 3 minutes, it's a little bit too fast.
It's too fast.
And if it's like over 10 or 15, then you're like...
No, then you're having trouble falling asleep.
The notion of quieting the brain down, actually, I started to think about it differently. I started thinking about it as a toggle between this imagination creative network and this executive functioning network. And the executive functioning is making lists and organizing and problem solving. And not problem solving in the way that a creative network might, where it's searching on sort of more open-ended.
No, it's like a computer. It's like a computer.
I
running.
need to do this.
And is that the voice of your brain?
That's the voice of my executive functioning brain. It's very upset. I need to make this happen right away.
It's a little bit Arnold Schwarzenegger too.
And the creative side is sort of out in a meadow and ideas are coming to it. And it's like, let's try this on and let's try that. And he talks in his book also about how the creative imagination network has a much higher degree of emotionality. So in that sense, when we're dreaming, and I like the idea of dreams as part of the visualization, sort of the experimentation, sensory experimentation, like we're rehearsing. That's the word I was looking for. In that sense, we're not only rehearsing psychologically, but we're rehearsing emotionally, where we create a scenario, feel what that's like, kind of thinking about Bruce Lipton, we're kind of trying on the programming in a way. And this is where I think people can get a lot of benefit, is knowing that they're toggling between those two states and having enough time in the creative imagination state to allow it to do its thing.
For sure. I also, this was in his bio, but we didn't get to talk to him about it. He started by going to community college. He went to Compton Community College, and he got his BA from Berkeley, his MD from USC, his doctorate from UCSD, and his cancer surgery specialization from UCSF. So he kind of like hit the whole coast, but just really cool. He started in community college, and I just really think he has a neat story.
Last thought about this need for the creative imagination network, tying it to some of the other things that we talk about, intuition and spirituality. I actually think that people's have a much higher ability to connect with something greater than themselves in that space. So it's not just about problem solving. I think there's an inherent wisdom that gets quieted down because our society prioritizes the executive functioning, getting things done, and we need it. Like, that's how we drive and stay in our lane and not crash, and that's how we make sure we're fed, et cetera, et cetera. It keeps us alive, but by prioritizing that, we sort of lose out on some of the inherent wisdom that can be accessed in that space.
Yeah, and we've, talked a lot about that, about those kind of transcendental and kind of theta, kind of zones, and that comes up a lot. I mean, like, more episodes than I can even think about have talked about this. So really like that notion of that sleep entry state being, full of possibility, which is why people are doing this lucid dreaming. And, maybe I'll have to try and do some of the exercises and see if I can do it.
For Substack, we're going to have a challenge. I think we should start a community chat about the practice of setting intention before we go to bed.
And seeing if it works.
Seeing what type of dreams we can have, and then having a short practice upon entering back into awake life.
Happy to engage. One of the things he talks about is there are certain people who have donated dream journals to, it's kind of sounds like just like a giant like dream cloud. It's like they collect people's journals. Some people remember a lot more dreams, and they have people who sometimes for 50 years keep a journal of their dreams. And so that allows some of these longitudinal studies. So I don't know if we'll get it. I don't think we have a large enough sample size yet on Substack, but you never know.
We're going to find the commonality in the breakers' dream patterns. If you haven't already joined us on Substack, head over, join the breaker community. There's so much awesome bonus content there. We can't wait for you to see it all.
From our breakdown to the one we hope you never have, see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, one and now she's gonna break down